Many things are still a baffling mystery in our world. Science doesn't quite yet have all the answers or all the keys to unlock the secrets of our universe. Every day, somewhere, someone sees something they can't explain. Something that we're told is not there, is not real, or simply doesn't exist. Too many reliable people tell of sightings and encounters with the unknown. The myths, legends, folklore, and old wives' tales are usually based in fact and in reality. When a witness to such a strange encounter finds no one believes them and faces ridicule from people they trust and love, they turn to us, the Alabama Bigfoot Society. Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Alabama Adventures. I have a lot to tell you and I have a lot to put into this video tonight. I know I won't get it all done. I have already got in plans 2 other videos on this particular subject that I'm going to have to do because you just couldn't get everything that I want to say and tell you about into one video. And I know you're sitting there thinking, well, what could this be or who could this be? It's not going to be about Bigfoot or ghosts or anything like that tonight. Tonight I'm going to tell you about one of my heroes, one of my country music heroes who I enjoy his music now just as much as I did the first time I heard it many, many years ago. Tonight I'm going to take you down to Tallapoosa County to Collage. And I know by saying Collage that you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about now. Hank Williams Sr. What we did, a couple of members here the other day had never been down to Collage. They, of course, knew of Hank Williams Sr., who I'll just call Hank because that's what Hank liked to be called. And we went down there to see Collage so I could show them what Collage Beach looked like now. It's a whole different place than what it used to be when I was a young man and my father and mother carried me down there some. And when we used to visit in just passing or whatever. I also have some stories I want to tell you about Hank that I don't think anybody else has ever heard. One came from my father, and as I've told you in the past, I want to do some videos on him pretty soon. But as I said, there's just so much to put into this video that I want to get to it as quick as we can. Hank Williams only lived to be 29 years old, but he packed a whole lot of living in those 29 years, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of that tonight. So let's get started from the tail end of the Appalachian mountain chain in the heart of the South. This is Alabama Adventures. As you probably already noticed, I have changed pictures over here on the wall. This is a picture of Hank Williams. I want to tell you a little bit something about it, and so let me just sort of zoom in on this picture. Okay, let me get over here so there won't be such a reflection where you can kind of see it, light coming through the windows and that type of stuff. But anyway, what I want to tell you about this picture is where I got it. Now, in a previous video, I mentioned Blue Creek, which is down near Alexander City. A lot of people that will be listening to this video around Tallapoosa County and Alex City, Dadeville area, will know exactly what I'm talking about, Blue Creek. Blue Creek was a dance hall down there many years ago. It was there for a long time, and I used to frequent Blue Creek. Always enjoyed going down there. It was a very pretty place. It was just an old big building with a big dance floor and a place for the band, and met a lot of nice people down there, and some people that I still come in contact with today. First time I went to Blue Creek, I guess it was about 40 years ago now, maybe a little bit longer. But some great times down there. I wish the place was still there. The actual dance hall is gone now because of all the new businesses and that type of stuff. Development, I guess, around Lake Martin, you would call it. But what I want to tell you about this picture real quick, I know I'm going to get sidetracked a lot with Hank tonight. But anyway, what I want to tell you about this picture is how I got it. Down there one night, they had Hank Williams' band. The old Drifting Cowboys were down there. And that's who me and my girlfriend went down there to see. We wanted to be to where we could say someday that we actually danced to Hank's band playing music for us down there so we could dance one night, and which we did, and we really had a great time that night. They really put on a great show, even though Hank was already dead at the time and had been dead many years. But anyway, they had these pictures for sale down there, and you could purchase one, and I did. This was one that I purchased from, I can't think of his name right now, I'll think of it in a minute, but anyway, the steel guitar player was who Hank's old steel guitar player was who I bought this from and paid for it. Anyway, the picture didn't cost but $5. And back then, $5 was $5. But anyway, I went on and bought it. And he asked me if I would like the band to autograph it. And I told him, no, I didn't want anything marked on this picture of Hank, that I was too proud to be able to get a picture like this. But what I wish I had done is I had purchased one to keep like this, and I wish I had purchased one now with their autographs on it. But you know, you make mistakes sometime, and you kind of wish you'd done something else. But anyway, that's where this picture right here that has hung on my wall ever since I got it, and I got this in the mid to late 1970s. So it's been here for around about 40 years on my wall. Not this particular wall. I moved it from where it was originally hanging so I could get a little better picture of it this afternoon for the video. Then right over here on the other wall, let me just sort of swing around right over here. My dad was a very big fan of Hank, and this is a poster, and I framed it after my dad got it. Now, I don't know where he got this poster, or if it's an original poster, or if it's not, but he came in with this one afternoon and handed it to me and said, I got something of Hank that I want you to take care of. So I put it in a frame, and this poster has been there for many years. It was from the Louisiana hayride that Hank worked for many years. But if it's original or if it's a reproduction, I don't know. But I'm very proud of it. It was something that my dad was proud of whenever he brought in. Because I'm going to tell you a little something about him in a few minutes concerning Hank. But right now, what we need to do is, let me get the camera back around here to where I can talk a minute. But right now, what I want to do is we'll go down to Collage. I'm going to show you Collage Bridge. I'm going to show you where the old restaurant was. The old one's not there anymore. They have done a lot of remodeling, a lot of rebuilding down there. We're going to go visit Hank's cabin where he actually lived for a year or two. I'm not exactly sure how long he lived down there. Wrote a lot of songs. I want you to see the cabin. We didn't get to go inside that day, as you'll see in the video. But anyway, at least we got a picture of the cabin, a little bit of video. And so now let's head on down to Alexander City, and we'll get this video going, and I'll be back to tell you a couple of stories about Hank. Okay, now you may have to kind of bear with me tonight as we put this video together. As I said, there's a lot I want to tell, a lot I want to put in here. We may get sidetracked a lot, and we're getting sidetracked right now before we leave to go to Collage. I got a little something else I want to show you real quick before we do go. And let me get the camera right up here. This particular picture right here is a picture that I drew of Hank back in 1975. And you may look at it and say, well, that there's not a real excellent job, and it kind of favors him and everything. But back then I was just sort of learning about art and that type of stuff, and I believe I had just graduated high school. But anyway, I was doing a lot of experimenting, I guess, with art, trying to learn how to draw stuff. This is the second portrait of a person that I ever drew. And what I did I drew it first with a pencil till I got it like I wanted it. Then I went over it with a pen, the lines, and I had the outline of his face. And then I took a black crayon, is what the black is. It's not exactly what you should use whenever you're doing a portrait. But at the time, when you didn't know exactly what you were doing whenever you're drawing something, it came out pretty well, I thought. But anyway, it's something that's hung on the wall here for ever since about 1975, so it's pretty old too. One other little thing though, I hope the man that I'm fixing to tell you about, I hope he's watching this video. He was one of my old school teachers back whenever I was in school, back in the early 70s when I was in high school. Let me put it like that. His name was Coach Langley. He's the first man that I ever drew a picture of. Was sitting in class, supposed to be looking up answers to questions or something, and anyway, I had a notebook there, and in the notebook on the back of the cover, I just went to drawing while he was sitting up at the desk. And like I said, we were supposed to be doing the work in there, but I just went to drawing, and I drew a picture of him, and it came out pretty well. And A lot of classmates and everything bragged on it and everything. I don't know if Coach Langley ever saw that picture or not. I was sort of afraid to show it to him. I didn't want to make him mad because he was a coach. But anyway, that's our first little sidetrack, and let's take on off down to Collage, and I will get this video going. Well, hello, and welcome to this Alabama adventure, and we are off on one more adventure today. If you'll notice in the background, let me get you a better shot of that. This is Collage Bridge. This is close to Collage Beach that I've talked about, and this is one of the many boat ramps that they have on the backwater down here. But what we're going to be talking about today is not Collage Bridge or Collage Beach, or be talking a little bit about the back. We'll be talking a little bit about it. What I'm going to be telling you about today is something about Hank Williams. Hank Williams, as everybody knows, is one of Alabama's famous sons, and that's where we're headed, over to the Hank Williams cabin that we're going to be looking at in just a minute, and some other stuff I'm going to show you about him. I have a few stories I want to tell you about Hank also that aren't known. It's stories that people have personally told me. But anyway, I just let you get another shot out there. You can see somebody riding a boat way over there on the other side, and I do want to get a good shot of the bridge. The sun, once again, today is so bright I can't hardly see what I'm doing, but you can kind of see what's going on down here. Now here's some people that's launching a boat, and I'm going to put that on today so you can see that. We'll get a shot of them actually launching the boat down here on close to Collage. Anyway, it's just a little something I thought you might be interested in. A lot of people come down from everywhere, and a lot of fun here in central Alabama. Okay, now we have come a little bit farther down the road, and I wanted to show you a little something else before we get to where we're going. This is the Lake Martin Amphitheater, and let me get you a little good shot of that sign. Of course, you can also buy some fireworks on down the road somewhere, but this is the Lake Martin Amphitheater Park. And I'll do a little quick sweep of it where you can kind of see it. And we're going to be talking about Hank Williams, like I said, and there's been a time or two that Hank's daughter, Jet, has actually performed right here. I miss those concerts, and would like to go to one of her concerts so I could say that I did see her. I have seen Hank Jr. Of course, Hank Sr. was a little bit before my time. But anyway, that's the Lake Martin Amphitheater. Okay, now I want to show you this right here, this sign, Kaw-Liga Restaurant, Kaw-Liga Marina, Church and Pines. But anyway, this is, we're going out to the Kaw-Liga Restaurant. I want to show you that right quick while we're down here and before we get over to the cabin where Hank actually lived. All right, we've come on down to the Kaw-Liga Restaurant, and I want to show you that right quick. Here's the sign, and here's the actual restaurant. You can see a lot of people in the parking lot out here. It's a whole lot different now than from what it used to be whenever Hank was coming down here. Let me get a shot of the bridge again. We just walk on around. There's a boat going across. You can look at them right quick while I'm getting out here. And there comes another one. This is a very popular place down here. I hope I get all of these facts right. I'm going to tell you what I remember whenever I was a child, and we used to come down here some, and things I've been told by other people around. I may not get all the facts exactly right, but anyway, this is Collage. This was out front of this cafe, restaurant, whatever it is. It's where the old wooden Indian used to stand, and that's the one that Hank Williams actually wrote the song about, was the old wooden Indian that used to stand in this yard out here. So anyway, one more time, let me get you a little quick shot of that. The Indian actually stood out front there somewhere, kind of where the parking lot is now, from the best I remember. I do remember coming down here years ago, and I did make a picture of the, I believe it was the second Indian, after the first, the original Indian was stolen several years ago, and I don't never remember seeing it. But it was out here in this yard. The entrance coming in here used to be a little bit different than what it is now. But anyway, I just wanted you to see what it is down here now, Collage, where the I'm not sure if Hank wrote the song here back in the cabin or where he wrote it, but this is the location where Collage stood that the song was written about. Okay, now I want to get a little shot of this right here. This is a church, and this was not here back whenever I was younger, and we came down here a lot. This is the first time I've been down here in several years. I'll just let you see that right quick. It's a little church in the pines, and I'm sure if Hank was alive today with all the songs that he wrote, and he did write a lot of religious songs, and I'm gonna get on that in just a little bit about some of the songs that he did write, and I'm sure that there would be a song on the radio now called Church in the Pines if Hank Williams had lived. And one other thing right here I want to mention real quick, and some of the other videos I mentioned it the other day, and as soon as I catch my breath I'm going to mention it again. If you'll remember the old saying that John Muir, who was an environmentalist like I'm accused of now, said that the space between two trees is a doorway to another adventure in Alabama. So I'll go down here and get a little shot of the actual inside of the church. Now I'm not sure if you can see me here in the shade or not, but this is a pretty good sized little church, and it'll be very interesting to come down here one Sunday morning or whenever they have services to be a part of it. A little breeze coming in off the lake. It certainly feels good today. Alrighty, here we are. We found pretty much what we're looking for. We have found the historical marker that's on the side of the road, and I may not have mentioned that this is on Alabama Highway 63. Anyway, I'm going to let you look at the historical marker for just a moment. We are next to the Children's Harbor. You can really see that sign very well, and there's part of the Children's Harbor whatever it is thing down here. But anyway, I'm going to hold it on the sign the best I can, and I'll try to read it. It says Hank Williams Collage Cabin 1952. At this site stands a cabin where country music legend Hank Williams composed the song Collage in August of 1952. The song's title was derived from the name of a Creek Indian town located on the banks of Collage Creek until 1836. And as you know, that's about the time the Indians had to leave out of here on the Trail of Tears. Hank's September 23, 1952 recording of Collage reached #1 on the country music charts in 1953 and has since been recorded by numerous country and popular music artists. Built in 1946 by Darwin and Neil Dobbs, the cabin was restored to its original condition in 2001 by Russell Lands, Inc. as a tribute to Hank Williams and his music. And this was placed here by the Alabama Historical Association 2002. But anyway, it's something to see. It's something that all the people in this part of Alabama, especially this part of Tallapoosa County, is very proud of. That the greatest country music singer, composer, writer, there's just not enough you can say about him, actually lived here in Tallapoosa County for a pretty good little while. Alrighty, now we have made it over to the Hank Williams cabin, and right here is a little sign. Let me back up to where I can get that. This is the actual cabin where Hank stayed when he and Audrey were having a few little marital problems. But anyway, you can go inside the cabin, but they say that there's a group in there today that has already got it rented, so we won't bother them. But at least this will let you kind of see what the cabin looked like. Let me get on around here to the side to get a little bit better view from the trees. But you might want to come down here and check it out. We may come back and do another video on the inside of the cabin sometime. But anyway, this is the cabin where Hank Williams lived, where he's supposed to have written the song Collage. And no telling how many other songs were written in that particular house. You wonder what type of stories and Alabama adventures that this cabin right here could tell you about Hank Williams. Okay, now I've come around to the back side of the cabin that faces the lake, and I'm sure Hank sat out here a few times sipping on a cool one with his feet propped up on that rail, and just look at the view that he had. I know a lot's changed since the early 1950s when he was actually here, but he still had a fantastic view of this lake. And if you couldn't sit here and write songs, poetry and that type of stuff, something would certainly be wrong with you.
In many ways, Hank had a fantastic life. Then in many ways, he had a very miserable, sad life, because there's nothing more miserable than being in a bad marriage. My dad said a lot of times, if he hadn't lived the life that he did with all the heartache, misery, and pain, that he would have never written those fantastic songs that will live forever. One more time, I'll give you one more shot of the porch where I'm sure Hank sat and wrote songs. And of course enjoyed a evening drink or two, I'm sure. But we'll talk about that also in a little bit.
I hope you enjoyed that little trip down to Collage, and that's the way we say it here in Alabama. It's not Collage. If you will notice, actually, it's kind of mispronounced in the song. It's Kaw-Liga is the way that it's spelled, and that may have been the Indian pronunciation on it. But you know how we are here in the South, and we are here in Alabama. We leave out all the unnecessary syllables that we can in a word. And most people around here call Collage, Collage. And anyway, at least you'll know what we're talking about. We leave a syllable or so out of there. But anyway, what I want to do is do a little bit of backtracking. A little something I left out about this picture over here behind me. I'm not sure if you can see it right now, not with this cowboy hat on. But anyway, I'll just get a picture of it and put up on the screen right quick and tell you a little something about it. I've got to tell you one sidetrack story so I can tell you something else about Hank. But anyway, this is what I need to back up and tell you about the night that I got this picture. I told you earlier I went down there with an old girlfriend, and we went down there in a 1977 Pinto. And I know you're sitting there laughing about that, saying, why would you want to go see one of the most famous country bands that has ever been in a 1977 Pinto? Well, it was around 1977 or 78 whenever we were down there, so it was a pretty new car. And I like that little Pinto, and I wish I had one today. If I had one today, I'd want a Pinto station wagon, so you'd have a little bit more room in it than the hatchback, I believe was what that was called. But that was a good little car, and I enjoyed driving it and going places in it. But anyway, let me get on back to the story. I'm telling you about the Pinto. There is a little something to tell you about that. Whenever we went down there that night to Blue Creek, and that's something else I need to straighten out. I said that Blue Creek was close to Alexander City, or Alex City as we call it, which it is. It's in the same county. But actually, Blue Creek is just south of Dadeville, Alabama, on Highway 49. And if you're ever in that area, be sure to go by Blue Creek. And if you go on down Blue Creek south, you'll come to Walnut Hill, and that's where another old girlfriend of mine works, at the Eagle Station down there. Or last time I heard from her, she was. If you go into Eagle Station down there at Walnut Hill, just ask one of the women in there if they know Sasquatch Jim. And if you do, then you'll be run up on an old girlfriend of mine, the one I was telling you about a while back that used to go to the casino. But anyway, we'll have to not talk about her tonight since we're talking about another old girlfriend. Now, me and the one that went to Blue Creek in the Pinto, that's what I need to tell you about first so I can get on another Hank story from that. Anyway, whenever we left Blue Creek that night, seeing and dancing with the band while they played for us down there, or whatever you want to call it, we headed out to Florida. We went to Florida and stayed down there for 2 or 3 days in that 77 Pinto. We had a good time down there, but well, there was a battery failure as usual, and I've got new batteries in there, and I hope they'll last a couple of minutes till I can at least tell this part of the story. Anyway, we went on down to Florida, and we stayed down there for a couple of days, or maybe 3 days or so, and we didn't have reservations, and we wound up just sleeping on the beach out there, and that's something that you can't do down there anymore, or I wouldn't advise, because times have certainly changed since then. But we had a great time down there. But anyway, we came on back home there about middle of the week, and anyway, I would let her borrow my little car sometimes, as you will your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whatever. Not that I have a boyfriend, I don't do that, but anyway, some of you ladies out there probably let your boyfriends borrow the car is what I meant. Anyway, I had let her borrow my Pinto, because we both like to drive that little car, and she had to carry somebody to Montgomery for some reason or whatever, and anyway, whenever she and I had been down to Hank's grave, and we had stopped at a little hamburger place, McDonald's or somewhere, got something to eat. And we actually went on up there and ate dinner a time or two whenever we'd be down there, just be visiting the grave. And that's what her and her friend had done when they went to Montgomery. They decided to just pick up something to eat, and like I did, go up to Hank's grave and just sort of visit the grave, as a lot of people did after she got sort of hooked on Hank too. But anyway, she said whenever they went by the grave that day, said they sat on the bench, and there used to be a granite or marble bench down there. I don't know if it's still there or not. But anyway, she said whenever they got through eating there at the grave site and everything, that there was always a 55-gallon can down there that you could throw trash and stuff like that in. And that's what I always did with the sacks or whatever we had. As a matter of fact, that's what me and my parents used to do whenever we would come through Montgomery. We would always go by Hank's grave up there, and if we picked up something to eat along the way, then we might sit there and eat or finish eating. We'd always throw the trash in this 55-gallon can that was there in the cemetery, not right at the grave, but it was just a little ways down from Hank's grave with a trash can where you could throw old flowers or just whatever you had up there. But anyway, she said whenever she walked down there to the trash can to throw the sack and whatever paper and that kind of cups, everything in the trash, she said that there was this flower that had been tossed in the can, and said as she looked over in there going to throw her trash into the can, that there was a very nice, very large card attached to this flower. Of course, the flower was wilting and everything, and somebody had just taken it off the grave and had tossed it in the trash down there was what it was. But she said the card was open, and she said she just looked a little closer to see what the card had to say. Said it only had very few words on it. Actually, I saw the card after she got it, but it had to Hank from the Williams family. And when she saw that, she got it, took it loose from the flowers, and got the card, and she kept that card, and I guess she still has that card today. That was just another little something that I wanted to tell you about Hank Williams. But anyway, that this was around 1977 that somebody sent that, some of the Williams family actually sent that card on a flower, and I guess a florist put it out there on the grave. But that caught her eye. It had to Hank, and then from the Williams family. And she was very proud of that, and she, I guess, still has that card today. I wish I had a photograph of that card. I would certainly put it on here, but she and I went our separate ways, so I don't guess I'll see the card again. Anyway, the next one, I have got a handful of papers where I have made notes about the things that I want to tell you on this video about Hank, stories that I've been told or things that I know or something like that. But anyway, the next little story I want to tell you about is the day that Hank Williams got arrested. And who would arrest Hank Williams, and where else would he be arrested except in Alabama, in Alexander City? Okay, now what happened? Now this was the way that I was told the story, and you know how stories and legends are. No matter what happens, somebody's going to change it and try to make it sound different, try to make it sound their way, like they know all about it. And I'm not saying this is exactly the way that it happened. I'm just saying that this was the way that I was told the story 2 or 3 times over my lifetime. All right, what happened? Hank was living, I believe, at Collage. He may have still been living in Montgomery, or he could have been living somewhere. I don't know where all Hank did live. But the person that told me said that they thought he was living at Collage at the time, which is a little ways down below Alexander City. So anyway, one Saturday afternoon, Hank rolls into town, and he's been enjoying a few alcoholic beverages while he's been sitting on the porch down there and this type of stuff, and said he's pretty drunk by now whenever he gets to town. He doesn't have anywhere to go or to go play a show to, that's what I mean. He didn't have a show to go to that night, undoubtedly, and said he just stopped in town. Now, I don't know exactly where in town the Hank stopped, and said he reaches in the back seat of the trunk or whatever and pulls out his guitar, and said he just starts singing there on the streets of Alex City one afternoon, and it's supposed to be like on a Saturday. But now I don't know for sure what day it was. I never saw the arrest report or anything like that, or never talked to anybody that was in jail with him. Although I did do a video a while back, and some young lady from Alexander City commented on one of the YouTube videos where I had mentioned Blue Creek, and Hank said that her grandfather was actually in jail the same night that Hank was there. And I would have liked to have gotten in touch with her so she could have done a little segment on here telling about what her grandfather had to say about the night that he spent in jail with Hank Williams. But anyway, maybe we can do that a little bit later on. And if she's watching this video, I would appreciate her getting in touch with me. I would certainly like to do an interview with you about what your grandfather saw and heard, and what he and Hank talked about that night. But anyway, let me get on back to when Hank actually got arrested in Alexander City. They, I guess they got him for public intoxication was probably what it was, or public drunkenness back then was what it was called. Now we have a lot of syllables and unnecessary words and that type of stuff to make things sound better than what they actually sounded like years ago. But anyway, not doing a English lesson this afternoon. They arrested Hank and they carried him to jail. And the jail in Alexander City is right in the middle of town. Used to be the courthouse was right in the middle of town also, but I believe that building now is turned into the Alexander City police station. Anyway, they carried him to jail that night and he had to spend the night there. So anyway, they let him out the next morning whenever he sobered up. And this is a picture that someone snapped of Hank as he was coming out of his jail cell. As you can see, he had his shirt off, but he had his hat on. And this was the day that Hank got arrested. And I guess that was probably the only place in the United States that he was ever arrested, was right there almost in his hometown. I guess Alexander City for a while, or Alex City I should say, for a while I guess was Hank's hometown when he was living at Collage. But anyway, I have always heard this. I've heard it two different ways. Other people may have heard it other ways. But anyway, I have heard that whenever Hank came in contact with the judge or the chief of police or whoever it was, that he had to go before down there that day. I don't know how things was run back then. But anyway, that Hank made the comment that if they would just tell him how much they wanted for that town, the whole town of Alex City, that he would write them a check and have it torn down, plowed up, and planted over with peas. I've also heard that he also said, another version of it was, rather than peas, was he would have the town torn down, plowed up, and planted in turnip greens. Now you may have heard it some other way, the people down around Alexander City, but that was two different versions that I have heard over my life when people was telling me about the day that Hank Williams got arrested and went to jail. Alrighty, now let's go on to the next story, and I'm having to go through my notes real quick, having to turn the camera off and read notes, so I'll be sure to get all this in here tonight. Right now, I want to show you a picture of my dad. This was, he was probably about my age that I am here in this photo. He was in his 60s in this particular picture right here. But as I have said before in some of the other videos, he always drove heavy equipment. And here's a picture of him on the tractor that he drove all his life. This was his main tractor that he always worked off of, and his expertise in road building. And he has built many, or I've been in on building many roads here in the state of Alabama. But anyway, what I want to tell you about him, the reason I want you to see him, was one of his stories that he always told me, that he actually met Hank Williams. And I'm going to tell you that story now. I'll try not to make the story real long, but my dad was very proud that he met Hank Williams, and he became a very big Hank Williams fan, or he probably already was, as most people in Alabama were back then around 1950. And I believe, let me get my hat fixed, I believe that's when this happened, sometime around 1950. Might have been a year or two either way, but it was after Hank had become very successful, very famous, very well known. And this was how this, he always told the story, and he told it many times, because as I said, he was very proud that he met Hank Williams, and I would have been too. That's the way it is now. I have seen Hank Jr. in concert. I've never seen Jet in concert. I would really like to meet her, because she really looks like Hank Williams, and I feel like looking at her, you would be looking into the face of Hank. She really favors Hank, as I'll show you in just a few minutes. I have a picture of her I want you to see. But anyway, getting back to my dad's story. All right, we got to go down to Cadillac County in South Alabama. Evergreen, Alabama was where this happened. He was doing some road construction work back down that way around 1950, And this particular day was real cold. He said it was a very cold day and the wind was blowing, and it was coming not a hard rain, but a good heavy mist of rain. Said it was that kind of little rain that when the wind's blowing hard, hits you in the face, it feels like little pins and needles. He said that's just the kind of weather that it was that day. And they didn't have to work that day because it was raining and it was just too wet to work. So anyway, him and some of the other men that he worked with out there doing the road construction went up to a little a store. And back in those days, little gas stations or service stations or filling stations, whatever you wanted to call them, were built somewhat like a house or a little barn with like a little awning or porch that went out on it that covered the gas pumps. And in rainy weather and that type of stuff, you would pull up under this little porch so you wouldn't get soaking wet while you were filling up your car or putting gas in your car or whatever. And that's where they had gone that day, up to this store. It was getting around lunchtime, and he said about 6 or 7 other men, plus the man that ran the store, was in this little store building that day. And in the back of the store, they had a pot-bellied stove to heat it with. Wood heater is what that is. And he said they were all the men that he worked with were just standing around the heater, getting warm and this type of stuff. And in the very back of the building was a little cafe, like where you could order sandwiches or, get some dessert like pies or pieces of cake, coffee, Coke, whatever you wanted, hamburger, hot dog, French fries, stuff like that. And so that's what they were going to do that day. They were just going to eat lunch there. Said it wasn't hardly lunchtime, but said they were in there and said one of them had just put a little bit of wood or coal, whatever it was that they were putting in the heater, and said the man that ran the store, who was sitting up at the front of the store behind the counter, where he could look out the window and see, when somebody came up to get gas or whatever, pulling under the little porch like awning out there, particularly on this cold winter-like day. And he said all at once the man behind the counter said, "There's a Cadillac pulling up." And he was real excited about it because back in those days, very few people could afford a Cadillac back in the late 1940s. This was just after World War II. Around 1950, very few people could afford to ride in a Cadillac. And this guy jumps up and says, "There's a Cadillac pulling up." And he said it's a brand new Cadillac. So they all began sort of looking to see, a couple of them walked up there to, maybe look out the window. Didn't want to put their face up against the window to be peering out at whoever this was. But anyway, he said that this guy got out of the car and said it was undoubtedly the driver or chauffeur or whatever you want to call it. But said he got out and went around to the pump, and that's when you just had to turn the pump on and you pumped it yourself. A lot of times back then, people that ran the gas stations and stuff would actually pump gas for you. But anyway, this guy had got out of the car and had gone around to the back and was pumping the gas before the owner had time to get out there. But anyway, some of them were sort of looking at the car, and my dad said, heck, he was still standing back there at the heater and everything because he'd gotten pretty cold that morning, and coming on in to the gas station, or kind of like a convenience store now. They had a little line of groceries like canned goods and that type of stuff. And as I said, and they did have a little cafe there in the back. But he said all at once, the front door opens. And he said everybody just looked around because the door had a little cowbell on it. So if the owner was in the back of the store, when a customer came in, he would hear him open the door. And this cowbell kind of rang, and he said everybody just looked around from what they were doing and said, here's this man standing in the doorway, and he walks in kind of slow, and said he has got on a overcoat that comes just below his knees, and my dad said it was a tan beige colored overcoat. Said he remembered that, and said the guy had on a cowboy hat, and said he kind of thought that was a little odd that somebody would be out in this kind of wind wearing a cowboy hat, but said whenever he came in, he sort of pushed the cowboy hat up a little bit like that. I guess he had set it down on his head when he got out of the car. But anyway, the guy turned his back to him. He had, like I said, he had on this overcoat. You really couldn't tell who it was. He had turned his back to him, and he was closing the door because the wind was blowing pretty hard. So he was pushing the door closed so to keep the cold air out. And when he turned around, everybody began to sort of recognize him, and then all at once he says, "Howdy, I'm Hank Williams." Now when he says this, he reaches his hand out across the counter and shakes hands with a man behind the counter. Okay, now let me back up just a little bit. I was sort of getting ahead of myself, but I am trying to remember this story as my dad told it. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of a little bit. I have a picture here I want you to look at of this old store building. Now, this is not the store building that Hank came in. This is an old store building that's a few miles from my house. And it's the last one of those old-time store buildings that I know of. As you can see in this picture, weeds and stuff are beginning to grow up around it, that type of stuff. It's not in use anymore other than just a warehouse barn for the people that own this land where this store building is at. But this will give you an idea of what kind of building that I was talking about, an old store building, an old gas station back in the 1950s. All right, now let's get on with what we were talking about Hank coming in the store. He shakes hands with this first guy and introduces himself. As I said, he said, "Howdy, I'm Hank Williams," and shook hands with this guy. Well, this guy tells him his name, and he invites him to come on in and get out of the cold, come back there by the heater and warm a while, as people here in the South always do now and always did back then, and I guess some of us always will. There are a few people that won't, but most of us still have Southern hospitality and that type of stuff. So said Hank just not in no hurry. Said he just walks back there to where all these guys are, holds out his hand, shakes hands with every one of them, introduces himself to everybody, and everybody tells him who they are. All right, he gets on over there by the heater and said he turns his back to the heater, warming his backside like you do here in the South on a cold winter day when you come into a place and there's a heater or a fireplace. You always go to talking to whatever, and you turn your back to the heat. It just seems like it warms you up. And said that's what Hank done, and said he just went to talking, and just like he had known them all his life. And later on in the story, after my dad had talked to him a little while, and these other men too, said that when they introduced themselves, said that Hank remembered every one of them's name. And he always, my dad always commented on that a lot of times when you meet somebody for the first time, they'll ask you, especially somebody as famous as Hank, I guess, will always ask you, now your name was so-and-so or whatever, or your name was, and then they'll pause for you to say it. But said Hank didn't have to do that. Whenever you told him your name, that he guessed that he just remembered it. He was just that intelligent, he guessed. But said anyway, Hank come on in, and they talked a while, and the other guy that was the chauffeur came on in after he had filled the tank up, and he said, my dad said that he heard the guy telling the man at the front as he walked by that Mr. Williams would take care of the bill in just a few minutes. But anyway, in the meantime, after they talked there for a little bit and everything, Hank invited them all to eat. He told them, asked them, or said something to the effect, it was about dinner time, and did anybody want anything to eat? And of course, to begin with, no, I don't want anything. And so Hank said, no, really, anybody that wants anything to eat, he said, I'm buying. He said, as a matter of fact, I'm buying everything today. And of course, whenever Hank was at his highest in his career, he could afford to buy everything today. But anyway, Dad said that he went back there to where you place your order, and said he ordered a hamburger, French fries, and a Coke. And said he remembered that very well, because that's pretty much what everybody else ordered after Hank insisted that everybody eat dinner with him that day, and which they did. He said it probably took 20 or 30 minutes for, well, not that long to get the stuff ready, but said after they got the food served and everything, said it was probably 20 or 30 minutes that they all sat there eating with Hank and his chauffeur that day. Now, I don't know who his chauffeur was, if he's still alive or who he might be, but anyway, this is a story that my dad told, and I believe very seriously that he told the exact truth of what happened, because as I said, he was a very big Hank fan after that. But anyway, they did sit there, they ate dinner, and Hank told them anything else they wanted that he was buying, like, cake or pie or whatever after they got through. And he said, one or two of them went on and got a little something like that, maybe another cup of coffee or whatever. They were on the way home. And like I said, I don't know if Hank lived in Montgomery or if he lived at Collage whenever this particular incident happened. And he told them now anything else anybody needed, that he was buying everything today. And my dad said that he was always one of those guys that would always carry on or have a little something to say if there's always a bug. But anyway, would carry on with joke or whatever. And said he just told Hank, he said, well, if I'd have known you were coming by today and going to buy everything when I got my gas a while ago, said I'd have just filled up the tank. and said Hank told him to go fill it up. And anybody else there that needed some gas to go out there and fill up. And of course they, no, we're not going to do that. We wouldn't think about doing that. But said Hank just insisted and just kept on until everybody went out there and filled the cars up. Okay, it's now time for Hank to go, and chauffeur goes on out, or maybe he and Hank go out at the same time or whatever. But anyway, said Hank stopped up at the counter and asked. He had told the owner to just sort of keep a tab of what all he owed him, what all he was buying that day, and which the man did. And whenever Hank started out, he went by the counter and he said, "How much do I owe you?" And of course, the guy added it up right quick and told him. And for that particular time, around 1950, it was a pretty good little bill, but it wasn't that. It wouldn't be that much now. But said anyway, my dad said he didn't remember exactly what it was. That Hank owed, but said he reached in his pocket and pulled out $100 bill and laid it on the counter. And he and the chauffeur, or maybe the chauffeur had already gone out, but said when he laid the $100 bill down, said that was more than what the bill was. And he turned to go toward the door, and said the man behind the counter said, "Hold on, Hank," because Hank had already told him not to call him Mr. Williams, that his name was Hank, and that's what he wanted to be called. But anyway, he said, "Hank, hold on, Hank, I owe you a little bit of change back." And Hank just turned around and said, "Keep the change." And as he was walking out the door, they were all still thanking him and telling him how much they appreciated him buying everything, and just really wasn't expecting him to do that. So Hank was on his way out, but by this time everybody had gotten up from the table, and said Hank had pretty much shook hands with everybody whenever he got up and told him how nice it was to have dinner with them, and how nice it was to meet him, and he was glad that he had met them, and just very nice person. What my dad said, and said of course they had all walked on up to the front, and I'm not sure if it was my dad or one of the other men said, "Hank, if there's ever anything I can do for you," said all you got to do is just let me know. And that's the way a lot of people here in the South are. You always make that offer to somebody that's done something for you. And said whenever he said that, Hank just turned to him and said, "Just keep buying my records." And they said he walked out, got in the Cadillac and took off, and as far as he knew, he never saw him again. But I don't know how long after that it was whenever Hank passed away. But anyway, my dad sure was glad that he met him. I remember him buying Hank albums back then. I've still got some here. I may show some of those on a future video of Hank. I know this video is getting a little bit long, and I have still got some more stuff I want to tell you. But anyway, that was the day that my dad met Hank Williams. And let me add this little bit to this story before we get on to the next little story that I've got. My dad said that Hank was not a very big man. Said he was thin. He had taken his overcoat off there whenever they started to eat dinner that day and everything. Said he was a very thin man, very frail man, a sickly looking man to him, but of course Hank was, and a lot of people back in those days didn't know the condition of Hank and sickness that he did have back in those days, and I'm going to tell you a little something about that in just a few minutes. But he said one thing about Hank, he was just like anybody else. Even though he had reached stardom, he was famous, he was rich, he was still just an old country boy, and said that's the way he always was. He guessed until the day he died. Success, fame, and fortune never changed Hank Williams. He was always Hank, Alabama country boy, I guess you could call it. But he really made a big impression on my dad, and I guess all those other men in there that day. But that was something else I wanted to add, that he said he remembered shaking hands with him a couple of times that day, and said he didn't have a real strong grip, but said he was just a very thin, sickly-like man. But anyway, as I said, that was the day that my dad met Hank Williams. Well, as I bring that segment to an end, I checked my notes and I saw a couple other little things that I do want to bring out on this particular story before we move on to the next one. I guess it wasn't very long after that Hank passed away, and that was whenever my dad, every time he went through Montgomery, would always go by Hank's grave. We lived in South Alabama whenever I was young, and I can remember whenever we would come up to my grandparents, both grandparents, but like the holidays, when we came through Montgomery, on the way up, we always went by Hank's grave. On the way home, we always went back by Hank's grave again. He just made a big impression on my dad, I guess, that day. And we always visited his grave. Anytime we had to go to Montgomery, we swung by. I believe it's I can't think of it's Oak something. I can't think of the name of it, but anyway, you can Google it and find out what it is. But it seemed like it's Oak something, Hank, where Hank is buried. Anyway, one other little thing that I do want to tell you, back in those days, whenever Hank was eating with them after he got through eating, he did pull out a bottle of whiskey and poured some in a Coke bottle that he was drinking and asked, did anybody else want one? Want a little something? And of course, 2 or 3 or 4 of them said, yeah, they'd take a little bit. And he poured a little bit of whiskey in their Coke bottle. Because back in those days, you pretty much didn't drink out of a glass in a cafe like that. You just drank out of the bottle. But anyway, my dad said that Hank's brand that he had that day was Early Times whiskey. And I can remember my dad, he wasn't a big drinker or anything like that. But I do remember him that whenever he did go buy whiskey or whatever, he might, drink a little bit, like on maybe Saturday afternoon or something like that. I don't remember him ever being drunk or anything like that. But he would always have Early Times. And I can remember there was one certain place in the cabinet where I couldn't reach. It was up high, but you could always see that Early Time bottle up there. And that was from Hank Williams. So I guess Hank Williams sold a lot of Early Times for people whenever they saw what he was drinking back then. Okay, now I have a little something else I want to tell you about my dad real quick before we move on. It was something that he did. I guess it was at least 3 years after Hank passed away. I was born 3 years after he died, so this would have been a little bit later than that. Actually, I was born in 1956. But anyway, let me tell you this little story so you kind of know what I'm talking about. Here about a month or so ago, I was asked to come do a TV show in Alex City. The Front Porch is the name of the show. It airs every morning on local TV down there. And a very good friend of mine, Kenny Dean, hosts that show every morning. And Kenny gave me a call and wanted to know if I'd come down and be a guest one morning. And of course, well, I had really been wanting to get on the Front Porch, to tell you the truth. It's just a very well-known, highly watched show in this area. So whenever I got a chance to go on, I told him I sure would. Just let me know what time and what day to be down there. And that's what we did. Anyway, whenever we went on that morning, Kenny introduced me by my real name, which is Jimmy. And I said, hold on just a minute, Kenny. I said, now, Jimmy was a little boy, 7, 8 years old. I said, now that I'm 61 years old, I've kind of shortened it down to Jim. Jim sounds like a older adult person to me anyway. But sometimes whenever somebody's named Jimmy or Jim, people call him Jimbo. And I get called Jimbo here where I live a lot. Sometimes whenever I go into business, somebody that's known me a long time, what's going on, Jimbo, or how you doing, Jimbo, or something like that, and I don't mind. Anyway, what I wanted to tell you was about my dad. I guess I was 7, 8, maybe 9 years old, and several times he called me Jimbo Cephas. And I didn't pay any attention to it there much to begin with. I really didn't know what he was saying. And one day I asked him, I said, what is that you're calling me? And he repeated it, and Jimbo Cephas. And he said that was what I was calling. He said it a little bit slower to where I could understand it pretty well and everything. And I asked him, I said, well, why are you adding that on to my name? And he said, because Bo Cephas is what Hank called his son. So I felt very proud that my dad thought as much of me, I guess, as Hank did Hank Jr. Anyway, he several times over my life, I can remember being on a little bit older, and he called me Jimbo Cephas. But anyway, I don't claim to be Bo Cephas or anything like that. I was just proud that my dad called me that sometimes. Anyway, that was just a little added something on there that I thought I would put on the video. And I know the video is getting long, so I'm going to try to shorten it as much as I possibly can. Okay, and as I said a little bit earlier, I don't know exactly how long it was until Hank passed away after my dad met him and everything. But what I want to tell you about now is, unfortunately, Hank died on January 1st, 1953. And the funeral was in Montgomery at the Montgomery Municipal Auditorium. The reason they had to have it there, it was with the largest crowd that had ever turned out for a funeral in the state of Alabama at that time. And it may still hold that record now. I don't know. Anyway, Hank was buried on January the 4th, 1953. And it was a very sad day when this legend in country music died. But there's always a but to the story, or something like that to add on to the story. I believe it was 2 days after Hank died on January the 6th that he had a daughter born. Her name was Jet Williams is her name now. Whenever she was born, her mother named her Anthabel Jet, and her last name was Jet, and I guess she took her last name as her first name to go along with Williams now in honor of her mother. And her mother was Bobby Jet, and I'll tell you something about some women in Hank's life at the funeral. I heard on one interview a while back with a some country music singer. I don't forgot who it was, but he was at the Hank's funeral, as I guess all of country music was. And here's a picture of outside the Montgomery Municipal Auditorium. You can see what kind of a crowd was there. Anyway, what this country music singer was talking about was what was kind of amusing or kind of a little odd or strange or something that day. That sitting on the front row at the funeral were 4 women that were very prominent in Hank's life. And let me tell you who those 4 women were real quick, to just tell you a little something else about Hank. And then I don't want you to think bad about Hank or anything like that, because Hank was not a bad person. He was a very lonely person. And that's what my dad also said, that you could pick up on just the way that Hank talked about things. And he talked some about his problems in life and things like that day. He said Dad never really went into a lot of detail about what Hank said about that, but he said Hank was a very lonely person. He went through a lot of hurt in his life, that the songs he wrote were from personal experience, or so he felt, from what Hank talked about down there that day. He said he didn't go into any great detail on his problems in life, but you could pretty much know from some of the things he talked about that that's where the ideas for the songs came from. And most of his songs were true, or so my dad said. But anyway, let me see if I can see my notes well enough to tell you who all was there that day. One woman that was sitting on the front row, of course, was Hank's mother. Lillian Stone was her name. His first wife, Audrey, was also there, who I guess really pushed Hank in the way of country music. She undoubtedly knew people and had connections that really got him going, and I guess if it hadn't been for Audrey, a lot of songs wouldn't have been written. Another woman that was sitting there on the front row and at the funeral that day was Hank's second wife, who was Billie Jean Horton, who also later on married Johnny Horton, who was a very famous country singer. Not long after they married, Johnny Horton was killed in an automobile accident and made her a widow for the second time. But anyway, she did marry, from what I've read on the internet, several times over her lifetime. The third woman that was also sitting there was Bobby Jett, who was pregnant with Hank's child. And at the time, they didn't know if it was a boy or a girl. You really didn't know back in those days. You just had to wait till the baby was born before you knew what sex it was. But what this country music singer was talking about, 2 of Hank's wives were there. His mother was there. And this woman who was expecting a child any time was there. And as I said, I may have said earlier, I'm not sure if I did, I have got so much to tell about, that Hank's funeral was January the 4th. He died on January the 1st. I may have mixed that up a while ago, but his funeral was January the 4th, 1953, and his daughter Jet was born January the 6th, 1953. So that was cutting it pretty close, sitting there on the front row at the funeral. But anyway, I do want to tell you something else about Jet and Hank. I have a couple of pictures that I want to show you. Now, okay, now I know this video is getting a little bit longer than what I like my videos to be. But as I said, there's just so much that needs to be told and that could be told, and we're just going to have to do another video. But I am going to get to this part. As a little bit earlier, I said I was going to tell you something about Hank's daughter Jet and him. And I sometimes wonder, or I hope maybe some of the Williams family is watching my videos, or particularly watching this one. And if Jet Williams happens to be watching, it is not anything that I know personal about you and your father, but it was just something that I heard on TV, and I want to pass it along to the viewers tonight. I remember the first time I ever saw Jet, and I'll show you a picture of Jet. The first time I ever saw her was on TV. She was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and For some reason that afternoon, it was just a coincidence, I guess, that I watched Oprah. I very seldom watched Oprah. I didn't particularly care for all the talk shows. There was one or two years ago that I liked that used to come on. But anyway, I was going through the channels, and when I came across the channel that had Oprah, in the background there was a picture of Hank Williams. So whenever I saw that, I stopped and began to listen. I guess I missed about the first 5 minutes of the show, maybe a little bit more. But anyway, they had this very pretty young lady on there. She was blonde-headed. She was talking about Hank. The first thing that I noticed was she favored Hank tremendously. She had Hank's lips, eyes, the shape of his face. You say, well, how do you notice things like that? Well, when you're an artist, you just notice everything a whole lot closer than what the average person does. And that's something that I miss now as being an artist with the diabetes. Getting as far along as it has, I have trouble holding pens and that type of stuff now, and of course my eyesight is all because of the diabetes. But anyway, we won't get on me. I want to get back to Jet. I did enjoy doing the artwork, and as I said, the picture that I drew of Hank that I showed earlier at the beginning of this video. But when you're an artist, you just notice things like that. But anyway, what her story was that she had found out that she was Hank Williams' daughter. And it was kind of a shock to the country music fans. A lot of people in country music and a lot of people close to the Williams family already knew all about it, already knew who she was, and that she was actually Hank's daughter from the day she was born. And what I want to pass along to a lot of people condemn Hank for he kind of had a reputation of drinking, and then in the latter part of his life doing some pain medication and that type of stuff. But Hank was in a lot of pain in his life. He had some type of back ailment or disease or something that caused him a tremendous amount of pain. And back in those days, we wasn't up on drugs as we are now. And I guess Hank did what he could do to kill the pain, whether it was alcohol or whether it was going to the doctor to get some kind of pain medicine or what. And there probably wasn't that much pain medicine back in those days as there are now. But anyway, this is what pretty much she told. You can YouTube Jet Williams, and I believe that her complete story is on here somewhere. But what she had found out, some family member had passed along a document to her that said she was indeed Hank Williams' daughter. Hank had actually gone to a lawyer and judge, and it was a very legal contract or document or whatever you want to call it, whatever it was called, that Hank knew that Bobby Jet was pregnant with his child. Now, as I said, they didn't know if it was a little boy or a little girl until she was born back in those days, back in the early 1950s. 3 months before Jet was born, Hank and Bobby Jet, his girlfriend, had gone to a lawyer or a judge or something and had got up this contract to where Hank wanted this child whenever it was born, and I believe he had set up to where so much money would be paid per month, just like child support is now, which I guess that was pretty much unheard of in the 1950s here in Alabama. You very seldom heard of divorce and that type of stuff. But even though the woman was pregnant with this child, Hank wanted it very much. And can you imagine what kind of life that Jet would have had Hank lived and got custody of her? She would have been she would have lived like a princess, or that would have been my opinion. Hank seemed very proud of her, that even though he never saw her, never met her, he died several days before she was born. He was buried, I think, 2 days before she was born. But earlier in the video, I also said at the funeral there was 4 very prominent women in Hank's life sitting on the front row, and actually Jet was there also, because in 2 days she was born. So 5 women that were very prominent in Hank Williams' life were sitting on the front row at his funeral. That was something very unheard of. Hank had already made preparations for this child to be well taken care of in his death or in his life. He very much wanted custody of her and was going to raise her. Him and his mother. And after Jet was born, Hank Williams' mother did get custody of her for, I think, about 2 or 3 years until Hank's mother passed away. Then I believe she became a ward of the state and was put up for adoption. Her name was changed. You might want to just Google Jet Williams to get that complete story. But if Jet's out there, I would certainly like to meet you someday, just so I can say that I met Hank Williams' daughter. Anyway, that's going to wind up this video tonight. It got a whole lot longer than what I wanted to, but it just shows you right there what type of man that Hank Williams actually was. He did care for this unborn child at the time, and as I said, had he lived, I'm sure that Jet would have been raised as a princess. I have heard that, I don't know for sure, but I have heard around Alexander City, or Alex City as all of us here locally call it, that Jet at one time, or may now, live on the backwater down there somewhere, and I hope she does, and I don't mean to infringe on her privacy or anything like that. She's just very fortunate, I would say very lucky, to be Hank's daughter and favor him so much. But anyway, one other little thing I do want to tell you, there's a Hank Williams Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. You can Google that to find out all the information that you would like on it. I have been there. That has a lot of Hank's clothes, a lot of Hank's old records, that type of stuff. The car that he died in is in this museum, and a wooden Indian also, I guess it's another Collage, will be right there at the front door whenever you go in. I did meet a lady down there that I thought was very possibly related to Hank Williams, because she very much favored Hank. She very much favors Jet. I don't know if that lady still works there or not, but when I was down there, and it's been several years ago now when I was there, and I hopefully pretty soon can get to go back. I really enjoyed going through the museum down there that day. But I asked her down there that day, was she related to Hank Williams? And she said, no, unfortunately, I'm not. I just work in the museum. But she resembled Hank. She really resembled Jet Williams a great deal. So you just never know what goes on in life, and what a lot of times what people's personal life is. But anyway, as I said, I apologize for this video getting as long as it is. There's just a lot of information about Hank that I wanted to tell. There's a lot that I didn't get to tell, and I am going to do a follow-up video on Hank pretty soon. Won't be the next video, but I have already got plans for the next Hank Williams video that I want to do. I guess with all that being said, I'd better bring this video to a close, and as I always do to my granddaughter that I never get to see, I would like to say hello to her. And I would also like to tell you that the Alabama Bigfoot Society is run completely out of pocket, and if you're in a position to where you can and where you would like to make a donation, that would be very much appreciated. All you have to do is to go on our website, alabamabigfootsociety.com, and right there on the front page you'll find a place to where you can make that donation. If you like this video, give us a like. If you don't like this video, give us a like. If you like what we're doing down here with our paranormal research and our Alabama history that we're starting and this type of stuff, we would hope that you would subscribe to the channel. And I guess with all that being said, and I guess you're thinking, well, it's about time. With all that being said, I guess I will see you on the next Alabama adventure, and Chico and I will see you on down the road.